Hello, hello, hello. Today we are back in our series with Ruth in Ruth 2. This chapter is all about introducing a new character, Boaz, and how Ruth meets Boaz and how Naomi thinks of Boaz and everything about the introduction of Boaz and Ruth and Naomi's adjustment back to life in Bethlehem. So we get a little bit of background in verse 1 saying, "Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." At first, it doesn't seem like there's a lot to this verse. It just emphasizes and introduces Boaz. But when you look closer, it says it was a family relative on Naomi's husband's side, Elimelech, and then later from the clan of Elimelech. And those are meant separately, and I think that's for separate reasons. So on Naomi's husband's side, to just show their family relation, but specifically they emphasize the clan of Elimelech, because as I brought up in my last video, names are very important in the Jewish culture. And Elimelech means my God is king. And Boaz means swiftness, which I take here as he is swift to respond to Naomi and Ruth's need. And we see that later on in the passage, continuing in verses 2 and 3. "And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor.' Naomi said to her, 'Go ahead, my daughter.' So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech." So these verses show that Ruth and Naomi still need food, so Ruth goes out to find food, and it just so happens that she ends up in the field of Boaz, who is from the clan of Elimelech. So that just shows, once again, his family ties, and that he is still the same Boaz. It's not a different Boaz, it's the same guy. And this is, one of many times in the book, it says something as it turned out, where it makes everything sound like it was chalked up to coincidence, where in the end, you can clearly see that God was working through these circumstances the entire time. And so it just so happens that Ruth ends up in Boaz's field working for food, and then we see when Boaz arrives in verses 4 through 7 saying, "Then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. 'The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you,' they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, 'Who does that young woman belong to?' The overseer replied, 'She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi.' She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and she has remained here from morning till now, except for a short time to rest in the shelter." So this shows that it had to be pretty regular practice that whenever Boaz would arrive at his field, he would say, "The Lord be with you," and his harvesters would say back, "The Lord bless you." So that shows, his first characterizing trait about Boaz is that he's a man of God, and he's a good man, and he's an honorable man. And then Boaz asks the overseer about Ruth, and the overseer fills Boaz in on everything that's happened so far, including how Ruth has been a very hard worker in the field trying to get food for Naomi and herself. And so then we see Boaz talk to Ruth for the first time in verses 8 through 9, saying, "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars and that the men have filled.'" So this interaction just shows unadulterated kindness on Boaz's part. I mean, he is giving Ruth a home, food, water, shelter. He deliberately told all of his men not to lay a hand on her. She is welcome, and she is very well welcomed in Boaz's home. And then we see Ruth's response in verses 10 through 13, saying, At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, Why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you have left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, whose under wings you have come take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. So Ruth is genuinely confused as to the kindness Boaz is showing her. And so she asks, why would you show such kindness? I'm not even from your country. And then Boaz puts Ruth's journey in better perspective than the book previously had, saying that she had to leave her own biological family and people and homeland to be with Naomi, with her biological family and her biological people in her homeland, forsaking everything she knew for her mother-in-law, including her actual mother and her father. And that is just huge for Ruth. And so Boaz says that she deserves to be richly rewarded. And Ruth, of course, is just grateful for all this and says thank you. And then we continue on with Boaz's amazing kindness in verses 14 through 18. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted, and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles, and leave them on the ground for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So Boaz again is very kind here. He lets Ruth eat with him and his servants, which is very good food, especially considering that Ruth and Naomi are poor. And she eats all that she can and has leftovers, which is a common recurring theme throughout the Bible even. And then she goes throughout the field and collects a lot of barley. An ephah is about 10 days worth of food. And so she collects an ephah of barley, carries it home, and shows Naomi and gives Naomi her leftovers too. And it adds that at the end, almost as a reminder that she's not doing this on her own. She's doing this for Naomi, and how Naomi is the important part of this, not Ruth. She's not doing it for herself. And then we finish up in verses 19 through 23, saying, Her mother-in-law asked her, Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead, she added. That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. Then Ruth the Moabite said, He even said to me, Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. And that is how we close off the chapter, where Ruth and Naomi talk about everything that's happened so far in the chapter. And then Naomi reveals that Boaz is a guardian redeemer, which we don't learn what that is in this chapter, but later on we learn that he is designated to redeem their family and to help their family. And so Naomi says it's probably best that Ruth stays and works with the women of Boaz's field. And so it says that she does that with the one caveat that she's still living with her mother-in-law, Naomi, so she can still provide for Naomi, which is still a noble and loyal thing of Ruth to do. And that is all for Ruth chapter 2. It's like 1:30 a.m. when I'm filming this, but it is all worth it. I love getting these up. I haven't done this in a while, but I'm trying to get a schedule set up so I can actually do this consistently. So Ruth should be done by the end of the week, and then I'll be starting a new series that'll take us to Christmas and to Easter. Not going to spoil too much about that, but I'm really excited for it. And as always, have a great day.